It was a quiet Sunday evening in the city of Lagos, and Helen sat at the dining table, going over the seating arrangement for her wedding. Her mother had called 3 times already, fussing over the color of the Oswebi fabric, and her best friend, Linda, had promised to come over with wine to help her relax. Everything seemed perfect, or so she thought. As she reached for her phone to call Linda, a notification popped up. It was an email, but not one she expected. The subject line read, "You deserve to know the truth about James." Helen froze. Her fiancé, James, was her safe place, her everything. What could this possibly mean? Hands trembling, she opened the email. Attached were photos of James, laughing and holding hands with another woman, a woman who seemed strangely familiar. The sender, an anonymous account, had written just one line, "He's not who you think he is." Helen's chest tightened as her mind raced. The wedding was just days away. How could she confront him? She called Linda immediately, her voice breaking. "You need to come over now," she whispered. By the time Linda arrived, Helen had scoured through the photos, memorizing every detail. The woman in the pictures had a distinctive scar above her eyebrow. Helen had seen her before, at a restaurant she and James frequented. She had thought nothing of it then, but now, everything seemed sinister. "Are you sure this isn't some prank?" Linda asked, holding the wine glass tightly. Helen shook her head. "Look at the date on this picture. He told me he was in Abuja for work that weekend." Linda frowned. "Then we need answers. Are you ready to talk to him?" Helen wasn't sure if she was ready for the truth, but she nodded. A part of her still hoped it was all a misunderstanding. That night, she sent James a simple text, "We need to talk tomorrow. It's important." He replied almost instantly, "Of course, my love. Everything okay?" Helen didn't respond. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure if love was what she felt for him anymore. The next morning, Helen barely touched her breakfast. Her phone buzzed with messages from vendors confirming deliveries for the wedding, but her mind was elsewhere. She rehearsed her confrontation with James repeatedly, unsure if she could keep her emotions in check. James arrived at her apartment around noon, his usual bright smile on display. He held a bouquet of roses, a gesture that would have made her heart flutter before, but now felt hollow. "Hey, beautiful," he said, leaning in for a kiss. Helen turned her face, and his smile faltered. "Let's sit," she said firmly, pointing to the couch. Her tone must have startled him because he obeyed without a word. She sat across from him, clutching her phone like a lifeline. "James, I need you to be honest with me," she began, her voice trembling. "Is there something you're hiding from me?" James raised an eyebrow, feigning confusion. "Hiding? What do you mean?" Helen didn't waste time. She opened the email and thrust her phone toward him. "This. What is this?" James's face paled as he stared at the photos. His hand trembled slightly, but he quickly composed himself. "Helen, I can explain." "Explain what?" she snapped, cutting him off. "That you've been with another woman while planning a life with me." "Who is she, James? And don't lie to me." James hesitated, his eyes darting around the room like he was searching for an escape. Finally, he sighed. "Her name is Patricia," he admitted. "But it's not what you think." Helen laughed bitterly. "Not what I think." "You're holding her hand and smiling like she's your everything." "How is that not what I think?" "She's someone from my past," James stammered. "I ran into her recently, and we've been talking. That's all." Helen's voice cracked. "Talking? Behind my back? Do you have any idea what this feels like, James?" James reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I swear, I didn't want to hurt you," he said. "She's been going through a hard time, and I was just trying to be there for her." Helen stared at him, her heart pounding. "If that's the truth, why didn't you tell me? Why does this feel like more than just an old friend needing help?" James fell silent, and the air between them grew heavier. Helen realized he wasn't just hiding Patricia, there was more to this story. Helen's heart raced as she watched James struggle for words. The silence was deafening, and every second made her suspicions grow darker. "Tell me the truth, James," Helen demanded, her voice trembling. "Is there more to this? Because I feel like I don't even know who you are anymore." James leaned back, rubbing his temples. His usually confident demeanor was replaced with visible guilt. "Okay, fine," he said, exhaling deeply. "I didn't want to tell you this because I knew how you'd react." Helen's grip tightened on the edge of the couch. "React to what?" she asked, her voice sharp. She's my ex-fiancé," James admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Helen felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. "What?" she whispered, disbelief washing over her. "You were engaged before. You never told me." James nodded, avoiding her eyes. "It ended years ago, long before I met you. But she's been reaching out lately, saying she made a mistake, that she wants me back." Helen shot up from her seat, pacing the room as her emotions surged. "And you entertained her? While planning a wedding with me? Are you serious, James?" "I didn't entertain her," James protested, standing up as well. "I told her it was over, that I'm with you now. But she wouldn't let it go." Helen spun around to face him. "So you thought sneaking around with her was the solution? Do you even love me, James? Or am I just a placeholder?" "Of course I love you," James shouted, his voice cracking. "You mean everything to me. But Patricia, she's unstable. I didn't want to involve you in this mess." Helen's eyes narrowed. "Unstable? What does that mean, James? Is she dangerous?" James hesitated, and in that moment, Helen knew there was more to the story than he was letting on. "You need to tell me everything," Helen said firmly, her hands trembling. "Because if you think I'm walking into a marriage built on lies, you're dead wrong." James sighed heavily, running his hand through his hair. "There's something else," he admitted. "Patricia isn't just my ex. She's threatening to ruin the wedding if I don't call it off." Helen's blood ran cold. "What kind of threats?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James finally looked her in the eye, and the fear in his expression sent chills down her spine. "She said if I don't leave you, she'll tell you a secret that could destroy everything." Helen froze. "What secret, James?" But James didn't answer. Instead, he sank back onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. And for the first time since she met him, Helen felt like she was staring at a stranger. Helen stood rooted to the spot, her mind spinning. The man she thought she knew so well was unraveling before her eyes, and the trust she had in him felt like sand slipping through her fingers. "James," she said, her voice low but firm, "what is this secret Patricia has over you? If you don't tell me now, I'm walking out of this relationship." James looked up, his eyes filled with desperation. "It's not that simple," he said, shaking his head. "If I tell you, you'll never look at me the same way again." Helen's anger fled. "Do you really think I can look at you the same way now? After finding out you've been hiding things from me? You owe me the truth." James hesitated, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his guilt. Finally, he began to speak, his voice barely audible. "When I was with Patricia, things were complicated. She was controlling, manipulative, and when I tried to leave her, she threatened to ruin me." Helen folded her arms, her gaze piercing. "And what does that have to do with me?" "She's holding something over my head," James admitted. "Something I did during our time together. It's illegal." Helen's breath hitched. "Illegal," she repeated, her voice rising. "What are you saying, James? Are you a criminal?" "It's not like that," James exclaimed, his voice tinged with panic. "It was one mistake. She convinced me to help her siphon funds from her company's account. I didn't know the full extent of what she was doing until it was too late. She kept the evidence, emails, transactions, and now she's using it to blackmail me. Helen's legs felt weak, and she sank into the nearest chair. You're telling me that the man I'm about to marry could be arrested at any moment because of something his ex did years ago? James reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Helen, I've been trying to fix this. I've been meeting with her to get the evidence back so I can protect us. Protect us? Helen laughed bitterly. You weren't protecting us, James. You were protecting yourself. Do you even understand what kind of danger this puts me in? James's face crumpled, but Helen wasn't done. And what happens when she decides that blackmail isn't enough? What happens if she shows up at the wedding with all this evidence? Do you have any idea how humiliating that would be? James looked away, his silence confirming her fears. Helen's heart ached, torn between the love she felt for him and the betrayal that now overshadowed it. I need time to think, she said finally, her voice trembling. I can't marry someone I can't trust. Helen, please, James pleaded. I'll fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. But Helen had already grabbed her keys and was heading for the door. Fix it, James, she said, her tone cold. And when you do, maybe we can talk. Until then, I'm not sure there's anything left to save. As she walked out, Helen felt a mix of heartbreak and resolve. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure if she was losing the love of her life or finally saving herself.